Moments ago, the For the People Act, Democrats' transformative voting reform bill, failed to get enough votes to head to the floor for debate. But what we really learned tonight is the truth about what Republicans believe. Now, Republicans have for decades been claiming that the true reforms needed for voting in America are all about election integrity. They've pushed voter ID laws and sought to purge voters from the rolls. Remember Florida in 2000 and Georgia just last year? But tonight, Republicans revealed that those things were all pretty much BS. Because given the chance to debate those very Republican-friendly ideas on voting, they punted. Not one Republican voted to advance debate on the bill. Surprise. And because the bill did not meet the 60-vote threshold to clear a filibuster, it will not get the chance to be debated. Cue the Schoolhouse Rock song, I'm Just a Bill. Vice President Harris, who's been tasked with the voting rights portfolio by President Biden, presided over the chamber vote, and she spoke to reporters afterwards.
And I think it is clear, certainly, for the American people, that when we're talking about the right to vote, it is not a Republican concern or a Democratic concern. It is an American concern. This is about the American people's right to vote, unfettered. It is about their access to the right to vote in a meaningful way. Because nobody is debating, I don't believe, whether all Americans have the right to vote. The issue here is there actual access to the voting process, or is that being impeded? And the bottom line is that the President and I are very clear. We support S1. We support the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and the fight is not over.
Now, the For the People Act would expand voter registration. It would limit political gerrymandering and change campaign finance laws to get much of the dark money out of our politics. And the vote here comes as 14 Republican legislatures across the country have already passed aggressive anti-voting laws. In a last-minute agreement, West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, who's been on both sides of the bill, nicknamed H1 and S1, agreed to support bringing it to the floor for debate in exchange for a guarantee that his voting reform proposal would make it to the floor for debate as well. The Manchin proposal is the one giving Republicans almost everything that they claim to want: national voter ID, limiting absentee voting, and allowing states to purge their rolls. Now, once his proposal surfaced, Manchin switched back to supporting the bill, which he co-sponsored in 2019, but that he changed his mind on in 2021 for a while. But with the Democrats all agreeing to move forward on the bill, the question now is, well, what's next? Majority Leader Schumer vowed to continue the fight while lashing out against his Republican colleagues.
The Republican leader uses the language and the logic of the Southern senators in the 60s who defended states' rights, and it is an indefensible position for any senator, let alone the minority leader, to hold. This vote, I'm ashamed to say, is further evidence that voter suppression has become part of the official platform of the Republican Party.
So what's next? With Manchin and Kristen Sinema's continued and ferocious defense of the filibuster, and with our democracy hanging in the balance, and with Republicans now openly revealing that they don't actually care about so-called election integrity, where do we go from here? Joining me now is former Senator Claire McCaskill of Missouri, Jason Johnson, professor of politics and journalism at Morgan State University, and Stuart Stevens, senior advisor for the Lincoln Project. Thank you all for being here. And, you know, Claire, I'm going to start with you. Catherine Rampell has a great article in the Washington Post. It sort of presaged what we're seeing now, basically saying that Joe Manchin kind of did Democrats a favor, right? Him putting forward that proposal that did a lot of stuff that Democrats, progressive Democrats, hate. The idea of doing national voter ID and saying, you know, you could purge your voter rolls and limiting access to voting absentee. He kind of exposed Republicans, because that's the stuff they say they want. Well, obviously they don't want it that much, because they've decided we don't want it because, you know, Barack Obama likes it and Stacey Abrams likes it. What do you make of what we've seen today strategically for Democrats?
Joy, I haven't watched the Senate debate very often over the last several years. I actually watched some of the speeches today, and I was struck by something. I was struck by the fact that Rob Portman and Tom Tillis called up the Founding Fathers and said how the Founding Fathers wouldn't agree with some of the things in the bill. Well, let me tell you what the Founding Fathers would be shocked to find out. They would be shocked to find out that we've had an evolution in this country that has left the United States Senate as nothing but a shell of what they envisioned. It is no longer the world's greatest deliberative body. They won't even debate. They will no longer amend legislation. They are hiding behind Mitch McConnell and the all-incumbency policy position of the Republican Party. We can only win if we keep you from voting.
Yeah. And just to stay with you for a second, Claire, because what we're seeing is, and, they talked about this on Morning Joe this morning, is a lot of discipline, first of all, from the progressive side of the party. For Stacey Abrams to come out and say, listen, if we can get voting reform through and we have to give in some of the stuff Manchin wants, fine, we'll do it. President Obama saying it's not perfect, but we're going to go ahead and do it. What Manchin proposed, and let's just put up, first of all, what the original For the People Act wanted: online voter registration, automatically registering voters, same-day registration, extending early voting in all 50 states, reducing the role of special interest money, ending political gerrymandering. That's super popular with the American people. What Manchin said that he would do is add a national holiday for Election Day, mandating 15 consecutive days of voting, which would actually help get out more votes, ban partisan gerrymandering, mandate voter ID, and allowed, alternatives like a utility bill, decrease the Attorney General's authority to do consent decrees. A lot of that stuff progressives hate, but they were willing to all buckle together. And in the end, even Manchin and Sinema all voted to advance the bill. Strategically, we're talking now about Amy Klobuchar saying they're going to now do field hearings starting in Georgia. And there's this idea now that they're going to bring Manchin's bill to the floor, see if that gets any Republican votes, which then would essentially clear the way to say, we got to do reconciliation. Does that seem like sound strategy to you, having been in that body, Claire?
Yeah, repetition is the best friend of political success. And what you're going to see the Democrats do over and over again is continue to emphasize that the Republicans will not work with them on the things that America wants. And there's nothing America wants more than making sure that people are allowed to vote. And Manchin's bill, it may not be perfect, but I'll tell you, it would sure improve the voting rules in my state. You can't vote absentee in Missouri unless you swear you have some kind of medical condition or going to be out of town. There's no motor voter. There's no early voting. I mean, there's a lot of things that would increase participation in my state in Manchin's bill. So let's get it on the floor and let's watch the Republicans hide behind Mitch McConnell's skirts once again.
I'm going to go to you, Stuart, on this, because I feel like for my whole life, Republicans have been saying we got to have voter ID. We got to be able to purge our voting rolls. Manchin says, OK. And then they say, the Constitution says no. I mean, I don't understand how this is a sustainable position for Republicans in some of these swing states where, they got some retirements in some states where voters might look at them and say, wait a minute, I thought you wanted this. And now you don't want it just because, why? Because Stacey Abrams likes it too? I mean, is this sustainable for a Republican position?
Well, it's a great question, and I think it depends on how much the profile of this gets raised and how it's framed. This should really be framed as a fundamental issue of Americanism. There really is no voter fraud that matters in America. I worked in elections for 30 years on the Republican side. If it was there, I would have seen it. It's just not there. It's a problem that doesn't exist, but they're trying to use as an excuse, Republicans are, to limit voting access. I mean, the sham of all this is easily exposed by the fact that when did all these state legislative bills get introduced for the most part? When did they get passed, pushed? After Donald Trump lost in what most Republicans still say was an illegal election. So this isn't in good faith. There's not anything about this that is really trying to make our election system better that Republicans are pushing. I hope it becomes a big issue because voting should be a fundamental right. And you'll know that Republicans are feeling confident when they start supporting efforts to make it easier for people to vote.
And Jason, the fact that they couldn't even get the Lisa Murkowskis of the world, Susan Collins came out and said, there's nothing wrong with these bills. We're going to put up a map here of all the places they're doing these anti-voter bills. The fact that they held together, what does that tell you in terms of the Republican position versus the Democratic strategy?
Well, it means that the Democratic strategy has to be, I hope, what Chuck Schumer said. Leader Schumer said, hey, this is just the beginning. This is our opening gambit. Vice President Harris said the same thing, because the Republicans are not going to change their mind. They're not going to, in any shape, way, or form, be open to any sort of improvements or changes or protection of voting. And you can see it by, and I'll be honest with you, Joy, everybody also knows at the local level, we had polls a couple weeks ago with this in West Virginia, where it's like, look, most people are in favor of For the People Act. A lot of Republican voters are in favor of For the People Act. So the Republican Party at a national level, their only interest is trying to put up this boogeyman. I find this whole thing where they're like, this is Stacey Abrams' bill. Stacey Abrams is not AOC or Nancy Pelosi. You're not going to scare America by talking about the lady who goes on NPR and writes books and lives in Georgia, right? Like, that's how desperate they are to try and demonize this by saying, hey, the black person likes it. So the Democrats' plan, which is we're just going to keep doing this over and over again until you guys break, or Kristen Sinema breaks, or Joe Manchin says, I'm tired of this. I'm sick and tired of coming to D.C. to vote for the same bill. That seems to be the best strategy at this point. Again, I'm like a lot of other people. I have issues with a lot of Joe Manchin's proposals, but it's better than nothing, and it might hold the fort enough for 2022 to be an unfair election as opposed to an absolute joke of an election.
And I think that is the point, Claire, right? If Democrats can get through even just mandating early voting in all of these states, they can live to fight another day and come back and go get some of these other things. Let's put up those polls that Jason just talked about. 71% back making it easier to vote early in person. 80% back voter ID. 50% back making it easier to vote by mail. 50% say voter disenfranchisement is a major problem. The thinking now is that if the Manchin bill fails, there are a couple of proposals that have been out there. Al Franken and Norm Ornstein have a proposal that would force the minority to put up 41 votes and hold the floor in order to filibuster, or lower the threshold to 55. Do you think that that's something, you know these senators, is that something that they could get Manchin and Sinema to go along with, you think?
Well, never say never. I think there is some reform that they would consider. Certainly making people own the filibuster rather than calling it from their office and saying, yeah, I object, and never even having to show their face or identify who they are. I think that's something. I think some of the reforms, Joy, that have been talked about, where if a bill comes out of committee on a bipartisan vote, it goes to the floor for debate and amendment, period.
Yeah.
And that way, if you get some Republican votes in committee, then you're assured that it isn't going to get buried somewhere behind Mitch McConnell, standing up and saying, no, we won't do it. So I think there are some reforms. But just keep in mind, if Chuck Schumer does this over and over again, and then he adds in gun safety, and he adds in some things like help with daycare and elder care, and he adds in the infrastructure and things like that. If he does that and the Republicans continue to block and block and block, not only will we have a good midterm, we'll have a historic victory in the midterms.
Stuart, that is what my question, too, is that Republicans are acting as if they've got a sure thing in 2022. That's not clear to me. People do want infrastructure. They do want police reform. People actually want things. They don't just want own the libs on TV. Is this smart politics for them to just say no to everything, including bridges to be built in these local communities, saying no to everything?
Well, I think there's two sort of contradictory truths here. It's not smart politics, but they do have the odds on their side. It's only 3 times, I think, in the last, 100 years that the party in power has increased the number of seats that they got in off-year elections. 2002 was the last one. I worked on the Republican side. And we were able to do it because of the Iraq War. We nationalized the election. And that's what Democrats need to do. They need to nationalize this election and make it a referendum on democracy, because that's what it is. And efforts like this to block people from voting is part of a larger strategy that Republicans have. They can't change the way the country is changing, so they want to change the way people are voting. And if you can make that a big national issue that is about what it means to be an American, I think Democrats could win.
And last word to you on this, Jason. LaTosha Brown and Black Voters Matter are on an entire tour where they are highlighting this very thing. It doesn't seem Stacey Abrams is going to stop talking about it. It does feel like President Obama's on it. This ain't going away, right? I mean, this is not going to go away just because Mitch McConnell says it does.
Right. No, it's not going to go away, but I have this warning for Democrats as per the usual. You don't get credit for talking about what the other side keeps you from doing. You get credit for what you get done. So you can't go into 2022 complaining, saying these guys are taking stuff from me. They got to get something accomplished.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They have to have something that they've accomplished in order to get those people out to vote. Claire McCaskill, Jason Johnson, Stuart Stevens, great panel. Thank you all.